in Psalm 119. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Your word is a lamp for my feet, a light on my path. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. There are football games, and then there is the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl does not abolish all other football games or render all other bowl games meaningless, but it is the culmination of all of those things. And in terms of Scripture, there is the law, and then there is the super law that Jesus talks about. The super law of Christ does not render all of the other laws invalid, but it adds new meaning and purpose to them. If we obey Christ's super law, we become better, super people in effect. And that's what I really want us to learn today. If we obey Christ's super law, we become super people in the finest sense of what super means. There are those who say that Jesus came to get rid of all the laws, that Jesus wanted to just abolish everything. But Jesus said in this passage, he did not come to get rid of all the laws, but he came to give new purpose to them, to fulfill them, to give new direction to them. He said, not the smallest letter, the least stroke, not the dot on the I, not the cross mark on the T, will disappear from the law until everything has been fulfilled. This means the Ten Commandments are still applicable. And Jesus goes on in Matthew 5. We didn't read all of Matthew 5, but he goes on to say, you say you shall not murder. I'm not saying to not murder, Jesus said. I'm saying if you have anger in your heart, you've already broken this commandment. If you have anger in your heart toward your brother or your sister, you break the commandment about not murdering. He said, the law says, do not commit adultery. He said, I'm not saying that's no longer applicable. I'm saying that if you have lust in your heart, if you continually have lust in your heart after another, then you have broken that commandment. It's all about the heart for Jesus. It's not about the exterior law. It's about what goes on in your heart of hearts. And that's the law of Christ. That's the super law of Christ. In Galatians 6:2, it has this great passage. It says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. What is the law of Christ? Also spoken about in 1 Corinthians 9. What is the law of Christ? Well, scholars all agree that the law of Christ is what Jesus said is the greatest and second greatest commandment. You know, somebody asked Jesus, and it's recorded in Mark 12, what is the greatest and second greatest commandment? And he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, all your mind. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the law of Christ. That is the law of Christ. Martin Luther used to say, love God and do what you will. If you love God, you're going to do God's will. You're going to listen for what God has to say. You're going to want to please God and to make him happy and to honor him. That's the super law that supersedes all other laws. To have your heart right with God. To have your heart of hearts right. That's Jesus' whole ministry, his whole teaching. Get your heart right. It's not a matter of having your religion on your sleeve. It's not a matter of obeying everything just so. It's not having your life in perfection. What counts is having your heart right, loving God, loving your neighbor. Jesus is not asking us just to exist. We're not here just to survive. We're here to thrive, and we thrive as we know our Maker, and not just know him, but love him. And as we interact with other people, and not just interact with them, but you love them. And you know, our world desperately needs that more than anything else. And in our very divided nation and divided time, we need God's love, and we need the love for each other more than ever. This is not some ancient, foreign, distant, 1,000-year-ago thing that doesn't apply to us today. It applies very much to us today. Love those with whom you disagree. I like that old song. If you're under 50, you probably haven't heard it. But it says, what the world needs now is, it's been remixed for the hip-hoppers. But it says, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. And it's very true. We need love. That's what Jesus was saying. We need love to get above the fray, above the decay, above the problems of life, to add some joy and some hope and some life to our lives. Jesus said, when you do that, it makes you a super person. You don't waste your life. It changes your life for better. You become the salt of the earth, making the world and life a lot more tastier than it was. Not drab and plain, but spicy when you love people. And you become the light of the world. And the more the darkness is around, the brighter the light shines. Don't be afraid to be a light. Peter put it like this: you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood. He could have said a super people, a people who are above the decay of life, the fray of life, the problems of life. And you add hope and peace and grace to life. Francis Schaeffer was a Presbyterian minister in Switzerland, and he once said, with God, there are no little people. There are no little people. Everybody has a role to play in life. There are no little places. God puts you in a specific place for a specific reason to honor him right where you are. As our benediction says, you go nowhere by accident. God has a purpose for your life, to be a light. And maybe you are the light that nobody else will see. If it's not for you, you're shining that light so others can see it and not hiding it. Moses said, how can I speak to Pharaoh? And God used Moses. Jeremiah said, how can I speak? I'm just a young person. But God used Jeremiah. Isaiah said, how can I speak? Man, I'm full of sin and guilt. I have unclean lips. How can I possibly speak anything for you, God? And God used Isaiah. Peter could have said, Lord, I'm just a fisherman. I don't know anything except for how to fish. And he could have said later, Lord, I denied you. I embarrassed you. But God used Peter. Paul could have said, Lord, how can you use me? I took part in the killing of one of your deacons, Stephen. I persecuted your children. But God used Paul. And God can use you if you will let him, if you will let your light shine, if you'll let your salt be salty and not be embarrassed. Everybody has a gift. God has given you specific gifts. There are no little people. There are no little places. In the tough times of life, your light can especially shine. In the hard times when your life is falling apart, as you cling to God, the light of the world, your light can shine even brighter. You know, everybody knows the word Uber today, but you probably know it in the wrong way. If we say the word Uber, you think about somebody who's going to use this app and you say, I want to get an Uber, and somebody will come along and pick you up. But the word Uber is a German word, and it means super, and it means over, and it means to carry someone. All three of those. And I believe that you and I are called to be Uber people. People who can carry others to Jesus. People who can show others the way. People who can point to him and to his love and to his grace. Be his lights. Jesus calls us to love when the world calls us to revenge. Jesus calls us to sacrifice when the world calls us to selfishness and to think that it's all about you. He calls us to be super people above the call of the world, different from the world, to transform the world, not just conform to the world. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. Don't lose your saltiness. John Stott said that we should not be surprised that the world decays like a rotten fish or rotten meat. We shouldn't be surprised at the decay of the world, at the disintegration of the world, at the lack of peace in the world. We shouldn't be surprised at that. But you can make a difference for Christ if we light the way, if we are the salt. Stott said that Jesus was probably talking about the big white salt rocks that comes from the Salt Sea. In Israel, the Salt Sea is the Dead Sea, same name, same sea. And you take these big old white salt rocks and you put them in your house in kind of a shady place, in a dry place, and you take out little pieces of that rock and salt your food or salt your meat. Use it for whatever you use for salt. But if you leave those rocks out where the sun can bleach them and the rain can wash them, the salt is the most soluble part of those rocks. It'll wash the salt right out. And if you stay in the world and you want to focus just on this world, your salt can wash right out of you. And if you're just the white rock, if you're just the shell, you're not being salty. It doesn't do any good. You're just meant to be thrown away. You're not useful to the Lord. Be useful to the Lord. Let your faith be salty. Make a difference. Get out of the salt shaker into the world, as somebody said. And be the light of the world. We are 1 billion pieces of reflective mirrors to the world that shine the light of Jesus to a dark world that needs to hear that there's hope. There's more to life than the political process or the economic process or being healthy or being comfortable. There's just more to life. And it makes a difference. I was in a meeting a week or two ago, and there was a guy who just got back from Nigeria. He was saying, in Nigeria, the political regime there had been corrupt for decade upon decade upon decade upon decade. One regime after another. The president always got elected. President always got uber rich, while the people remained uber poor. And there was strife, there was corruption in the government, and at the same time, there was a lot of hatred in that country. Boko Haram is in Nigeria, and they do things like steal people, kidnap people, and hold them for ransom, and kill people for no reason. It's just very violent, very ugly stuff. But something is happening in Nigeria. It has one of the fastest growing Christian populations in the world, growing by hundreds of thousands of people every week. And, the largest church building in the world now is in Nigeria that holds thousands upon thousands of people today. And just about 20 miles down the road from that largest church building are the headquarters of Boko Haram, who wants to wipe out all the Christians, who's a division of Al-Qaeda. But the church is making a huge difference. It's making a difference now. In the defeat of Boko Haram, people are coming to the church in droves because they don't want the way of hate anymore. They don't want the way of corruption and selfishness in the government anymore. And the government's changing. And the country is changing. How do you change the world? One person at a time. One more reflective piece of glass. One more light. One more piece of salt, one more grain of salt at a time, until the world becomes a better place. In a couple of weeks, I'm hoping, or as John Burris is saying, in 60 days, we're going to have light shining on our honor tower out there. And you'll be able to see it when you come from this way, when you come from that way, for a long way off at night. And somebody said, it's such a simple thing. Somebody said, why do we do that? And why are we even putting up a steeple? And I wrote this in a newsletter article, but I wanted to say it. In my first church, we had a little teeny steeple that was only about 15, maybe 20 feet tall. Wasn't very tall at all. But we decided to put these two little lights shining on the steeple. And much like our church, it was out in the country. There's fields still. We're still out in the country, If you go look out that way, there's a field, and you look out that way, there's a field. Well, in my first church, it was surrounded by fields, and you just were in the darkness as you drove down the road. And the very next day after we put the lights up on that steeple, I got a call from a guy I'd never met before in my life. He said, I was working down at the nuclear plant, and I was coming home at 3:30 in the morning. I was all depressed because my life just seemed to be falling apart. We had health problems. We had money problems. I was really about ready to throw everything away and just give up on life, literally. He said, and then I saw the light shining on the steeple in the darkness. I was just driving down the road. It was dark, 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 dark. And all of a sudden there was this light. And he said it reminded me to look up and to have hope. That's what we should be. Each one of us are lights that encourage people to look up and to have hope and to not give up. We mess up, we fail, just like Peter did, just like Isaiah did. We may feel inadequate like Moses and Jeremiah did, but God can use you if you will be a light, if you will be some salt, if you will decide in your heart to make a difference, and if you'll let Christ make a difference in your heart. When you take communion today, I invite you to take it remembering that you bring a taste to the world, that you bring a light to the world like no one else can. And I invite you to take the bread and the cup and to determine that you will love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor, those around you, with all that you are, pointing to him. Amen.